with Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here is Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This week, Creator's perspective on exaggerated human incompetence. Is widespread human incompetence to be expected, or is it unnatural? That's the big question, Carl.
Well, it is a big question. And I have the incompetence to muddle through and maybe get you somewhere further along the line in the discussion here. I remember growing up in the corporate world as a supervisor of people, high-powered people, in fact. And I used to joke with my colleagues about how everyone's entitled to rise to their level of incompetence. And that used to be a catchphrase. But it is true. I mean, we are all limited at some point beyond which we just can't reach. We just don't have more in capability. So this is an important subject, especially if it isn't natural and it's being induced or magnified without our even being aware of it.
Yeah,
and this is where we're headed here.
That's the big insight we're going to look at today. You ask Creator, there seems to never be a shortage of human incompetence to marvel at. It has come to be such a universally anticipated condition that people expect it, and hardly act surprised when it shows up almost like clockwork. Yet some examples are just so simply over the top that it beggars belief. If you stop and really consider if this widespread nincompoopery might actually be orchestrated and not a completely natural condition of humanity. This is reflected by the widely embraced quote of an unknown author: never ascribe to malice that which is adequately explained by incompetence. And this one by Peter Bergen: incompetence is a better explanation than conspiracy in most human activity. What is Creator's perspective?
All right, and this is the answer I channeled from Creator of all that is. We would tell you that these sayings are a clever deception in their own right, as is the widespread belief in human incompetence. While that has a basis in reality all too often, given that many humans act in a dumb fashion on a regular basis, and relatively few are exceptional with respect to intelligence per se, and their ability to organize their lives in a meaningful way to bring about great success and achievements. There is nonetheless something special about you as a species. That is best demonstrated in the wherewithal of the mind unfettered, the non-local consciousness, to know things without having studied, without having gone anywhere and observed something firsthand, but yet the knowledge is somehow there mysteriously. This is a kind of greatness because it is a knowledge, it is a divine reach on display. You being extensions of divine consciousness to begin with. That means your very makeup, your ability to think and perceive, can have a lofty reach unless you are too heavily suppressed. And that, unfortunately, is what has transpired almost from the very beginning of humanity, to dim you down and dumb you down as well. So you are of divine heritage, light being level capability, but when housed in the human container, the physical body, greatly attenuated and limited across the board in many respects. This is not the whole story, however. You are heavily subjugated and manipulated to embrace faulty thinking and many kinds of folly, being persuaded through a deception it will be a useful path to take and bear fruit, when in fact it turns out to be a dead end after all. And then the people involved look foolish, misguided at a minimum, and clearly incompetent, if not delusional, at the worst end of the spectrum of possibilities. There is engineering by superior beings behind the scenes, monitoring everything happening in the world and manipulating human beings right and left. This they can do in multiple ways, in a clever fashion, to remain hidden themselves as a source of influence. They can make people take pratfalls, literally, say stupid things on the record, even while being televised as a spokesperson and iconic figure to represent an authoritative opinion on something, and will all too often become a loose cannon, pronouncing things that are sheer conjecture, wildly improbable to happen as an explanation for something. And then most people do not react, simply look away, go back to their own routines as though nothing ever happened. That complacency as well is orchestrated. This keeps everything on a very low plane and suppresses human creativity and ingenuity across the board. No wonder there are so many examples of incompetence. You are manipulated to be that way, and then manipulated to poke fun at yourselves to further reinforce the mindset. It is to be expected. So it becomes a standard to live down to. And that reflects perfectly the thinking of the interlopers who see you as inferior beings and despise you because they are petty and judgmental, having only an ego to think with.
A standard to live down to, Carl. I love the way Creator puts stuff, but that is the message here, that there is superior beings, the superior only in terms of technology, but not in terms of wisdom, and certainly not in terms of morality.
Well, we bring bad news forward fairly often with our explorations because there's so many things wrong with the world. We can't help it. But I think, it's important to point out good news along the way. There's a solution for this. And what this means is what we think of as normal really isn't. And if it becomes normal, things are going to get a lot better. And that's what we're working towards. So this can be seen as encouragement to just define the problem. And if there's a solution, which we're going to get to, then things aren't so bad.
I agree. You ask Creator, you had one job is a phrase that has taken the internet meme world by storm and epitomizes the belief in, and dare we say, the celebration of human incompetence. Speaking of one job, you had one job. And referring back to a couple of shows ago, Creator revealed that the Detroit Lions were messed with by the interlopers, contributing to a very lopsided loss that all but extinguished their hopes of making the playoffs. But as their luck, quote unquote, would have it, it turns out a pivotal game that would have sent the Lions to the playoffs was discovered by NFL league officials and numerous professional pundits to be the worst refereed game of the entire 2022-2023 NFL season. So bad, in fact, that it has become an inquiry for the NFL Competition Committee. There were no less than 5 egregiously botched calls that all favored the Seattle Seahawks. As a result, the Los Angeles Rams, who mostly dominated the game, lost to the Seahawks in overtime and kept the Detroit Lions from reaching the playoffs. One missed call in particular was when the Seattle quarterback intentionally grounded the ball and no referee called a penalty. Literally everyone else watching the game saw how obvious a penalty it was, yet 7 referees who had one job, quote unquote, failed to call it. What can Creator tell us?
All right, Creator says, as strange as it may seem, this was manipulated to happen and is a good example of what we have described for you: the wholesale, widespread, and in depth manipulation at all levels of your society, in all your institutions, and many group activities of all kinds, as well as individual careers and encounters with others. Anything and everything is fair game to cause you trouble, get in the way, throw a wrench in the works, turn things upside down, prevent the expected from happening, and make the unexpected happen. On and on it goes. So, this game is in that vast list of things where they saw an opportunity to cause disappointment and hamper human achievement on the part of the Detroit Lions football team. And they manipulated the outcome of that other game as a double victory for them to not only disparage the losers, but as a secondary benefit from their perverse way of seeing things to yet again thwart the hopes and dreams of the Detroit Lions, who have been greatly picked on for many, many years, and only recently given an assist through divine healing intervention requested by a fan using the Lightworker healing protocol. When something goes against their expectations, this may create a backlash to intensify the force they employ to make things go their way. This, in fact, becomes a delicate matter then for the divine to answer prayers. If there is too much protection, the interlopers may, in fact, mount a lethal level response to get their way. In the end, no matter what, so there is a certain amount of balance and safety considerations needed to deal with such powerful adversary working against you so avidly. They are dangerous, much more than simply a nuisance.
Well, this is sobering stuff. I mean, it's for one, people can have a hard time believing it, but why would they pick on the Detroit Lions? Come on, don't they have something better to do? But they do this all over the place, Carl. They do it everywhere. And, this sobering admission by Creator that they could mount a lethal response. I suppose if the protection was too high, that they could go to the point of even crashing the team plane and killing the entire team if they were pushed that far. So there's a delicate balance here, obviously. And the last insight I have is that this is a targeted group, Carl. This is a targeted group, just like the new enhancement in the protocol handles.
Yes, and there are many who are targeted, meaning they're singled out in some way for extra punishment. Everyone gets a dose through wide scale mind control manipulation to darken your thinking and sully your beliefs and contaminate them with faulty ideas and beliefs that keep you looking for the wrong things and doing the wrong things. But there's about 5% of people, 1 in 20, who are what we call targeted individuals, and they really have a bullseye on them lifelong, and they will be manipulated both directly and the people around them manipulated to give them rough treatment, to turn against them, to hold them back, hold them down. It can be parents working against a targeted child of theirs without their realizing it, just being maybe exceptionally hypercritical and judgmental at times, and maybe more distant and somewhat neglectful, not enough to get them in trouble as parents, but not really exerting themselves and going out of their way to be loving and nurturing. So this is an example, of somebody, as an individual who might have their boss turn against them and find a way to fire them ultimately. Well, this is being done to a sports team in the same way, finding a way to get them to fail and have
Yeah.
someone beat them.
The thought occurred to me, Carl, because the Cleveland Browns are in that same category of of a really bad team that just seems to have everything go against them all the time. And it seems like the whole region, the whole Great Lakes, the Western Great Lakes region of Detroit and Cleveland, they're depressed cities that if we could sit here and talk for hours about how bad things are in both those cities over the last decades. So I'm wondering if the fact that they're targeted teams are just a reflection that they come from targeted regions. That's just a thought. Maybe we could explore it sometime. You
Yeah,
ask
could well
create.
be. Yeah,
Yeah.
could well be. We can look in, there's no end of people suffering,
Yeah,
that's for
right.
sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You ask creator, if it turns out that the referees were manipulated, could a single LHP, late worker healing protocol session, said for the referees of that game a week in advance, may that have been enough to change the outcome? Would the Lions be in the playoffs as a result, perhaps?
All right, and this is what Creator says. This is theoretically possible, and the balancing of energies makes this somewhat a close call. Not because we lack power, it is that a single person requesting this on behalf of many others, and especially going against a large body of interlopers, still having free will privileges and wanting the opposite outcome, creates a bit of a contest in which good does not always triumph over evil. But this is something that could have been seen to by doing more than one session. So there are ways to even the odds. And this is why we have repeatedly encouraged your channel and his compatriots at Get Wisdom to do all they can to recruit as many people as possible to use empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol for healing the interlopers and thereby bringing human betterment. This is an ongoing saga, but for the first time, the tools are available to make this a fair contest after all this time. When you've been always falling behind or coming from behind only briefly to then have another setback when you are yet again brushed aside or pounded down. Your day will come, but you must see to it and work in partnership with the divine to make that happen. Giving those referees some divine protection from manipulation would have allowed them to be objective and not follow inner orders that were actually coming from others, the extraterrestrial minders, manipulating them telepathically as well as energetically. There are many scenarios here. It is not necessary to change their opinions, make them blind to what they clearly could see with their eyes, but only divert their attention, blur their focus for a short time, fog the mind so it becomes inattentive and complacent, and not keenly following the action as would happen normally for a referee at key moments in an athletic contest. Having a group of referees has a trade off. It does increase coverage because sometimes the view of referees is blocked by the bodies of the many players on the field. So the idea is dispersing these referees across the field allows greater opportunity to see everything. But sometimes having multiple referees allows the mind to relax and be less focused, thinking another will be covering the action. So they are not the only person being counted on. That kind of thinking as well can be ramped up by the interlopers to reduce the efficiency of what referees might do in a game. It is not that they turn them into a rabid fan or opponent of one team or another, just to make them less sharp at key junctures will make all the difference in the interlopers holding sway in what they want the outcome to be.
So, as outrageous as a notion as this sounds, the implementation is really not that outrageous per se. In other words, the interlopers are not trying to make them into rabid fans of one team or the other. They're manipulating them subtly, but just enough to maybe compromise them. And then that can have an additive effect over time. But it is a real problem because the referees have become butts of jokes. I saw one little skit where a comedian was making a fake phone call and sending PayPal money to the referees to for his one-sided team and all that. So it's a real problem now.
Well, and I'm sure this is highly entertaining to the interlopers because they can actually manipulate what's happening. When you think about all the rabid sports fans watching a game and cheering on their favorites and vilifying their opponents and so on, if they had power to send negative energy and attack the opponents or do something just to subtly interfere with the quality of the referee oversight, that could throw the game, that could throw the contest. And would humans shrink back from that? Maybe some wouldn't, but we're talking about beings that are really criminal
Oh yeah,
in their
yeah,
perspectives, and so there's no telling what they might do just for fun, even
yeah.
if it's savage.
And the problem is so bad, Carl, that many times people on opposing teams almost unanimously will say, "Yeah, that was a bad call, but because it favored us, we're going to take it." But we acknowledge that it was a bad call. So it's some of these are just so egregious that even both sides agree it was bad, even the ones that benefit from it. Oh boy. U.S. creator, the Darwin Awards, quote unquote, is another internet invention going all the way back to when the internet was in its absolute infancy. Wikipedia describes them as a tongue in cheek honor that originated in Usenet newsgroup discussions around 1985. They recognize individuals who have supposedly contributed to human evolution by selecting themselves out of the gene pool, by dying, or becoming sterilized via their own actions. One 2022 incident for nomination is a man who broke into an Italian grocery store and, pausing for a drink, attempted to pull a single bottle of water out of a pallet that was part of a towering edifice of water, pallets stacked to the high ceiling. As a result of his effort to quench his thirst, he ended up tipping the entire stack and it collapsed on top of him, killing him instantly. Or at least one hopes it was instant. Once again, the Darwin Awards comes across as a celebration of human incompetence and helps to reinforce the widespread conviction in it. What is Creator's perspective?
Well, Creator says it is not human nor divine to make fun of someone for a failure, even when it seems inexplicable and requiring a true lack of intelligence or competence, depending on the nature of the dilemma they got into. People who have one of those moments when something goes wrong and they literally fall on their face would not appreciate the joke at their expense of others laughing at their plight when it might have been a quite painful and even causing a serious injury. Yet people will do so. This is at once a natural mechanism for releasing tension. That is a simple way of viewing it as basic human nature, but this does not speak to how much is human nature and how much is a perverted and lessened morality and level of sensitivity that is then interpreted as representing human nature, when in fact it is not human nature at all, but human nature gone wrong. A perversion of humanity in making fun of the underdog, the person who messes up in some way. Divine beings would see that as simply a circumstance, most likely the result of lack of experience, and not that the hapless victim of their own unawareness or miscalculation in getting into trouble. They would be sympathetic, realizing they had been there before themselves. And especially when people travel beyond their comfort zone and trying something new, they have not engaged in very much because their interests lie largely elsewhere. So it is to be expected they will falter. They will lack competence, perhaps for a good long while, if they are taking up something very demanding. You can take one of the greatest athletes anywhere and give them the task of learning to play a violin, for example. And what will be demonstrated will almost certainly sound wretched and perhaps, from a human perspective, laughable. But that does not make that great athlete an idiot or a bumbling incompetent. They are simply a beginner. They are unpolished. They are untutored for the most part. And it is not even a reasonable expectation to excel at something requiring deft movements learned through many, many long hours of practice and developing an ear for music, as well as the fine motor coordination and subtlety of motion and so on, required to have true skill and artistry. The same would be true of someone who spent their youth practicing the clarinet and playing in bands and wind ensembles and suddenly invited to fill in as a football player. You would not expect that individual to compete well and become a star wide receiver tasked with making a final play to win a game with a long pass downfield in Hail Mary fashion. The odds are extremely low of executing that feat for the same reasons. So, this is the difference fundamentally in how light beings view personal activities and performance compared to what humans think and feel. The latter do not look very deeply. They only see what is on display, and if they can find fault with it, will do so. And for many, it will be humorous, even though they themselves might not do any better personally. But they have seen great athletes, great musicians, great artists, what have you, and will find it amusing to watch others struggle to even reach a level of basic competence. That is a kind of insensitivity, and the requirement or need for release of tension through laughter is really a function of the level of pathology in being out of alignment on the part of the observer. To not be more understanding, compassionate, and forgiving in their judgment of others. That is ingrained because the interlopers have seen to it in making everything a competition, a contest with winners and losers. Their whole mode of operation in manipulating human society is the strategy of divide and conquer. They do it in every setting, in the kindergarten classroom, as well as on the high school football field, college sports, and the professional arena. All become proving grounds for excellence and a quite intense personal struggle with the hope of not looking stupid. Because if they mess up, they will be judged harshly by coaches and fans as well. All of that is non divine, but a standard way of seeing and experiencing things in human culture.
We are so spoiled, Carl. That is such a brilliant, brilliant analogy that creator just throws out there routinely about comparing having a great athlete pick up a violin, for instance. Just a brilliant analogy, and creator delivers with this kind of exalted performance almost with every channeling, basically.
Well, we have a lot to learn about what is normal, and if normal is to be divine, that gives you some way to frame this discussion, and how far away from that we are truly at on the spectrum. We got a long ways to go.
Yeah,
I remember growing up as a kid and pondering the question, how could I ever be like Jesus Christ? Because I would go to church with my family, and that was the kind of the gold standard, and it just seemed completely impossible and unattainable
sure, sure,
to be infinitely loving and understanding and forgiving
and
and being
patient,
able to stick to your one job. Maybe that's a
right?
apt analogy, maybe not, but and then do it no matter what. And wow, that is tough.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's very. Yeah, I think about that myself. It's quite the calling. U.S. creator. So-called slapstick, quote unquote, text comedy also comes across as a celebration of human incompetence. The list is too long to even categorize, but includes such classics as The Keystone Cops, The Three Stooges, Get Smart, Gilligan's Island, The Naked Gun, and even the famous Pink Panther movies with Peter Sellers as Inspector Clouseau. What is creator's perspective of slapstick comedy and its celebration of incompetence?
Oh, we're bursting bubbles again. This I don't like this, but we have to learn from it. So here we go.
Yeah,
Creator says this again is a good demonstration of the contrast between the divine realm and the physical plane, and how beings view one another and themselves engaged in new endeavors when they are on a learning curve still. The light beings will see at once variable performance as a function of experience as well as inner capability. Because no two souls are alike, the idea of a contest has little meaning. The idea of competition and making a contest of everything is an extraterrestrial perspective and has been imposed on your culture again and again and again, all through human history. And thus it seems quite natural because everyone has grown up where contests are routine in the classroom, on athletic fields, even in art and music, where there are festivals that are judged by a panel of experienced individuals who will rank the contestants and declare winners and, of course, losers. These are largely with little meaning other than for the egos and a kind of reward for hard work and putting many hours of practice in, as well as the stroking of the ego, which often for young people is very exciting because they have little life experience to see it is basically a quite temporary circumstance with fleeting benefits at best. No one truly cares who won last year's band competition because after a time, the very meaning of it becomes impossible to measure as everyone has moved on. And that construct that was present at a particular day and time in comparison to others is an arbitrary assessment to begin with, a judgment of something that is quite ephemeral and cannot be maintained in any event. If you are a winner at anything, it will only be for a certain length of time. Someone will come along and capture your crown if you decide to compete again. Champions can maintain that status for a while, but eventually will have to cede it to others who are younger, stronger, more talented, and so on. So, in the context of this endless competition, competence takes on a special importance it does not truly deserve, other than minimal competence. So, things are seen to which are necessary for smooth functioning of society, especially when one is paid for their labor or services, and there needs to be attention to detail, meeting deadlines, covering their duties, to be on the job, and attending to things when that could cause the operation of an organization to falter or even grind to a halt if they are absent without permission. And there is a hole where the assembly line can't keep going or an office becomes chaotic. Customers grow impatient and leave in disgust if the wait is too long, and on and on. The various things that happen, which will be attributed to incompetence, are vexing and often a source of friction and overall dissatisfaction with life in being a part of such time wasting and frustrating inefficiency. It is not good for morale. It does not reward the individual who often will be thwarted to not do their best if they have to depend on others who are less competent in keeping up their end of things. And this will take a toll on the whole of an enterprise. This is why engineered incompetence is so effective a tool to reduce efficiency, productivity, and eventually cause the collapse of societies. So it is not a laughing matter at all, but serious business and can rise to the level of a life and death issue.
So we're asking the question about slapstick comedy here. The creator says this, incompetence is really not a laughing matter. But at the same time, creator had said in an earlier answer that humor is important. It is a stress release. So it has a role, a very positive one, in fact. I think in terms of like, we have children. They're incompetent when they're very young, right? They screw up all the time. Sometimes they'll screw up in such a way that we can't help but laugh. But in our laughing, we're not laughing so much at the child. We understand that they are who they are, and we have love for them. That are our children, right? But occasionally they'll screw up in such a way that it just tickles our funny bone. you know, you're going to laugh uncontrollably. And I think we're called to maybe look at some of the adults that end up being incompetent and trying to look at them in the same way, not as inferior, but with a loving eye. But they just happen to, you know, trigger our funny bone. So
Well, that's human nature, so called.
yeah,
This is calling into question whether that's natural. So let's look a little deeper here. A child doing something goofy because of their quote unquote incompetence, meaning immaturity, lack of experience, lack
right,
of skill level being demonstrated as yet. One parent might laugh at them, at how foolish they look trying to do something they could do so readily. But another parent might just see it as endearing and might bring a flood of nurturing inclinations forward to
sure,
give them some reassurance that, hey, you're doing great, to try that and keep it going, you're going to get it, you're going to make it, that kind of thing.
right,
And what I would argue is that need for laughter to release tension is not the be all and end all of this dynamic. It's the end product of stress.
yes,
We have to look at where that stress comes from. So if we're conditioned in our culture to know that if we mess up, someone's going to laugh at us and make us humiliated. When something happens and it's kind of disconcerting, but it's not really hurtful or harmful. And then we have this laughter, it's I think it's as much releasing an inner tension about the fear of failure. And in a sense, you're laughing at the person's dilemma and not so much them. And
Right.
it's really releasing your fears because you're seeing that it's not you, that's somebody else, and they live to tell the tale, and maybe
Right.
it's not so bad and that kind of thing. But none of this is really normal. That's the thing that I think is important here.
Yeah. I agree. U.S. creator in Brian's hometown, Brian being me, of course. There's a giant mothballed plant built in the late 90s to supposedly make cell phones to sell in China. As outrageous as that sounds today. The plant operated for only a year and a half at less than a third capacity before it was permanently shuttered. No one has found a successful use for this white elephant that, would employ 5,000 people. It's huge. It covers acres and acres. That was built in a town far away from freeway access with a small local population and few, if any, attractions for newcomers. Who in the world thought this boondoggle was a good idea? What can Creator tell us?
Okay, listen up, folks. Creator says, while these seem to be simply failed plans, sometimes for reasons inexplicable to outside observers, but more through their ignorance than truly understanding the whole story. Some things are simply boondoggles, and they do happen with regularity. This is a major product of the governments around the world, where there are fewer checks and balances, less accountability, and no personal stake or responsibility in the outcome, because the government employees will keep their jobs no matter what. Whereas in a human organization, in a business setting, failure of individuals or a team assigned to meet targeted productivity may well get fired for non performance. This keeps everyone on their toes, striving for excellence, and greatly increases competence to ensure better productivity and thus personal success, having a stake in the outcome and a reason to strive to become as skilled and knowledgeable as one can to be truly competent in their role. But all across the world, there are many influences to create negative environments and situations where people become complacent, uncaring, lackadaisical, and frankly, lazy in carrying out their duties. So they underperform, do shoddy work, and find ways to work as little as possible, taking sick days, leaving early if they can get away with it, taking long breaks, and finding ways to look busy when they're truly doing little deliberately to not exert themselves because they are programmed to feel they are gaining something for themselves if they shortchange their employer. This is twisted thinking and a corruption, but it is engineered by the interlopers across the board in many ways through mind control to make people think this way. And it takes a toll across the board as well, because employees everywhere will be lackluster when they could be shining. And the consequences will play out accordingly in dragging down all of society. This, of course, is what the interlopers want to see.
And the problem is probably exaggerated by the fact that in most large organizations, it's a hierarchy of control, right? It's the people at the top that call the shots, and everybody else just takes orders and attempts to, implement them. And information flows a lot more from the top down than from the bottom up. And, depending on the personality and a type of the individual who's ultimately in charge, they may not want feedback about their great idea, right? And so they live in a kind of bubble where they think they're implementing the next great thing. And literally everybody else sees that it's a boondoggle,
Yeah.
but it pays the mortgage. So they're going to go along with it.
Well, people get caught up in the engineered inefficiencies you can think of as incompetence, but it's really a manipulation.
Yeah.
So it really isn't the inherent makeup of the persons involved. It's just their dilemma that they're trapped in a kind of swirling vortex of false information and false encouragement or discouragement. And then eventually the desired result is a failure, and it rewards the interlopers. Ha ha ha! We, this
Yeah.
is why I don't like laughing at the victims. You see,
Right.
because I feel the pain of this very acutely, and being on the front line, struggling with the darkness. It's
Yeah.
not pretty. It isn't,
You
and
know,
it's
just
really not a laughing matter. Even though
no,
you
no,
can
and,
laugh, as a human, but
I mean, just like 100 yards up the road from my house, there's a dual lane boulevard with a big grass median that basically goes right through a cornfield, and it's been there since we moved in. And that was supposed to be the new grand subdivisions of people that were going to move in to be employed at those huge plants. it's it's just weed covered, and it's now cracked up and difficult to drive on without destroying your suspension. But it's a kind of a sad reminder every time I drive by it.
well, it is sad. It's very sad, and those people had hopes and dreams,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this is all too common a story. Most business ventures fail. People aren't aware of that. They just think that, you can go into business and you're going to make a lot of money, and yeah, you got to know some things, and maybe that keeps them from launching the effort. But if they do, the odds overwhelmingly favor their failure.
Yeah, it's like
So
8 or 9
that
out
would
of
be an
10.
interesting question to probe.
Yeah.
How natural or unnatural might that be?
There might actually be a question or two in the database about that. It's possible we might have explored that in a long ago past show, but we'll see. You ask creator, like it or not, the world seems hell bent, quote unquote, on moving to electric cars. So far, the transition has been highly problematic with story after story after story of people having all kinds of unexpected, but even more alarmingly, expected trouble. For starters, there is not enough lithium in the entire world to build enough electric cars to replace the current gasoline and diesel powered global fleet. Secondly, we routinely use standardized batteries for everything from flashlights to wristwatches. Yet almost every vehicle has a battery customized just for it, and when the production of the car ends, so does the production of any replacement battery. As a result, there are electric cars out there where those batteries go bad at around, say, 60,000 miles. A new battery is like $14,000 when the car is only worth 10, but none of that matters because a replacement battery is not obtainable at any price. And yet people are lining up to buy these things. What is creator's perspective?
Well, this is a premier example of the folly in action that creator started out describing, to make things fail, to make incompetence rule. And you can expect failure when that is allowed to happen. So here's what creator says: things are even worse than your description here. For example, an even larger disconnect in thinking, being so woefully meager and incomplete, and thus a kind of gross incompetence, is the reality that no one is really thinking about where the electricity will come from to charge all of those giant batteries needed for this huge fleet of vehicles if gasoline is to be phased out entirely. There will need to be massive truck fleets as well as automobiles because they are essential for the moving of goods to all the world's stores from places of manufacture or distribution via rail, and from there spreading out to towns and cities and villages and the many retail establishments needing to be restocked with goods of all kinds. That is done via truck. Massive amounts of energy are needed for all these vehicles. There is not enough electricity that can be generated to provide all that would be needed by universal electric vehicle implementation. It is not even conceivable that the infrastructure to produce and deliver that much electricity to the numerous charging stations that would have to be installed, not to mention higher voltage wire in many cases for the rapid charging, to make it more practical to get vehicles back on the road more quickly than they can at the present time. The problems go on and on and on. The reason this is all happening is because it is an extraterrestrial manipulation to rob you of cheap energy and substitute something that is a kind of fantasy more than a reality that will make countries around the world bankrupt and fall apart if people do not see the handwriting on the wall and find an alternative to this madness. But this is what you are a part of because it is being done to you. No one is really thinking it through who was in a position to affect policy. The politicians are minions of the extraterrestrial alliance and work for them, not for the people. This is the reality of your world. The incompetence is engineered to happen and maintained assiduously through mind control.
Boy, creator's not pulling any punches on this one. And the thing about the electricity generation really is spot on because when you think about it, there's already brownouts happening in like New York occasionally, and even in California, even Texas too, for that matter, on certain occasions. And then on top of that, we're closing coal plants. We're certainly not building new ones. We're closing ones that currently exist. We're not building any new nuclear capacity at all. And so the only thing that's being added is solar and wind, but those are not high volume, generators at all, especially when you're talking about having to maybe quadruple the capacity of the grid in order to accommodate all this electrical vehicles.
Well, it has to be
So,
more than quadruple. I mean, in terms
yeah.
of what's being done now with so-called green energy, people who are technically proficient, the scientists and engineers who understand the technology of energy production have gone on record and pointed out that what the politicians want for us and are mandating it already in
Yeah.
legislation, banning gas cars after 1935 or 1930, whatever it might be. They are saying we're not going to have the electricity to support it. It's not possible.
Right.
If you have to cover a third of the United States just for one with solar panels to
Yeah.
have a chance of even limping along. I mean, how practical is that even?
Yeah.
Not
It's
to
not.
mention the cost.
Yeah. It's
And,
unbelievable.
and and this is all being shielded from the public that these technologies exist to the extent they do because they're government subsidized, not because
Right.
they produce enough energy at going rates to
Yeah.
pay the costs.
Yeah. And,
Yeah,
when I
so
talk to,
the science does not support this. The entire environmental movement, as I probed it carefully again and again and again from every angle, it's a giant, crazy quilt of false hopes and manipulated thinking. It
it,
doesn't hold together. It
it's
just
a
doesn't.
boondoggle.
It's a boondoggle. Yeah. And when we have sources of fuel in the ground we can just
Yeah.
drill down and pump out of the ground and use
Right.
it. It's all a kind of amazing spectacle to me.
Oh. Do you have a gas stove, Carl, or are you electric?
I have a gas stove and I don't want to give that up because sometimes our power goes off. It went off here about a week ago and it was freezing out.
Yeah.
And if worse comes to worse, you can turn your stove on and huddle up around it or something and get through a period like that for a while at least.
Yeah. I think gas is easier to cook with anyway. So,
It's much better.
yeah.
And people have pointed out restaurants will have to close because they won't be able to cook the way they do now
That's the point. I hadn't thought about that.
with
Yeah.
electric. I mean, they're really serious about that. The people who know and do this for a living. This is a kind of craziness and they're promoting some kind of health hazard. And there's no health hazard in this.
No.
There's trace amounts of methane, natural gas, all of, in the air all the time because it's something in the earth and bubbles up out of the ocean and the land and places and it's just not a problem.
And if that's dangerous, every time you pass gas, you're it's just as
Well, they're trying
dangerous,
to
right?
make that, like a hazard to human health. The fact that cows have flatulence,
Yeah. Oh,
that's
gosh.
causing significant uptick in the global temperature.
Oh, boy.
And we've explored that exhaustively, that
Just not.
climate change is not human caused. It just is not.
Right.
It's a scheme, as usual, to blame the humans for everything. And the ETs are actually manipulating the environment in a
Right.
zillion ways. It isn't humans, but
Right.
we're being blamed, and we're going to be further punished because we're too incompetent, too complacent to see this engineered kind of suicidal path we're on,
Yeah.
to give up our sources of energy. It's already undermining Europe big time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Germany and other countries outlawed coal production and coal produced electricity, and started building wind farms and making solar panels and so on. They can't keep up.
Yeah.
They don't have enough energy. Now winter's here, and it's going to be a huge problem because they can't make enough electricity.
Right.
Surprise, surprise. So this is serious and,
Yeah.
unfortunately, unpleasant to talk about.
And, when I talk to people that are eager to go buy an electric car, you explain some of these problems to them, and they actually acknowledge that there are issues. They know there's issues, but well, we'll solve them. There's this overwhelming faith in science and our ability to solve these problems. And the bigger problem is climate change. So we have to start going down that road. And if we don't hurry up, it's going to be a problem. So yeah, there's problems, but I'm willing to work within those problems. And it's like, well, good luck with that.
Well,
Oh,
this is the problem. You see, anything can be done on a small scale, and it might not be suitable even for everybody. But there's some for whom it's a value. Like to have a town car, and you don't want to be throwing noxious fumes in the air. I see that. I mean, it would be great to have electric vehicles that don't pollute the air.
right.
I'm all for that. But we have to make the electricity,
Yeah.
and we can't make electricity without polluting. Hello?
Yeah.
I mean, unless we use precious sources of fuel that have better uses for them.
Yeah.
And we need to be nuclear, and that is being kept from us by a manipulation politically to
Yeah.
make people first fear it. Well, we worked out how to make it safe. Sorry,
Yeah.
Hollywood. We
Yeah.
worked
Yeah.
out how to make it safe, and yet our laws prevent it. Guess why? This is
Maybe the
why. They want us to go down. They want us to be suffering, run out
right.
of energy. And what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Poverty, mass chaos from
Famine.
civil unrest, crime, the whole gamut.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not pretty.
So,
Got a lot of work to do, Carl. More
yeah.
LHPs.
Well, let's
U.S.
get to the
create.
solution here.
Yeah, we got right now. Here we go. U.S. creator exaggerated human incompetence is nothing to laugh at. As an attack vector, it is extremely effective in destroying confidence in our collective ability to even manage our own affairs intelligently. Can Creator share with us how empowered prayer and the Lightworker healing protocol can heal the underlying karmic dilemmas contributing to the problem, as well as how we can successfully ask for protection from those beings interfering with us and intentionally exaggerating our incompetence?
All right. Creator says the entire problem of human incompetence and the fact it is orchestrated to be as great as possible is a healing need and opportunity, both. It is achieved through inner corruption and a distortion of thinking in human beings by the extraterrestrial interlopers and their compatriots, the dark spirits, who are always looking for ways to work against love and light, to drag people down and interfere with their lives, to cause distress, because that will bring energy increases to deal with the emergency. And they will be able to tap some of that for themselves. So, possessing spirits undermine their host to cause distress and cause malfunctions, knowing it will get the person into trouble, and there will be an intense emotional reaction that rewards the spirits energetically. Such parasites can be removed by the divine realm, but only if people ask for this to happen. Given the world has little awareness of how ubiquitous this problem is, and increasingly ignore the reality of the divine and do not turn to it as a source of assistance to deal with anything, you are falling behind steadily. The world was once much more spiritual than today, with a high level of belief. In today's world, there is but a meager belief quotient remaining. That works against you also. If you want divine assistance, the first requisite is that you believe in the divine. A half hearted request cannot be honored fully because we cannot lead, only follow your desires. If belief is faint hearted and meager, we can only give a meager response because you have to use your energy for the divine intervention. It takes strong belief in us and strong belief in the self to warrant an empowered and highly effective divine intervention. This is what the tools of empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol are designed to address, to level the playing field and give humans the tools to work with for the first time in human history, capable of mounting an intelligent, informed, high-level request. In fact, a series of them in the form of the Lightworker Healing Protocol to address every potential source of negativity, including all the kinds of manipulations the interlopers do to people and what people do to one another in using their minds as a weapon, as well as their hands and other ways of hurting others to take advantage and get ahead. The return of greater morality is a function of spiritual alignment. In the absence of formal religious instruction, this will often be in a state of decline and decay. Because institutions are amoral and following the growing secular perspective, there needs to be a divorce from reliance on belief in the divine as a kind of cultural relic with little practical importance. The fact it has often been perverted to cause even religious wars as another bone of contention between those with differing beliefs is used as an excuse to condemn it and expunge its presence from society. This is the greatest of mistakes because you are cutting your lifeline. The way to put that back in place is to use the Lightworker Healing Protocol. This will empower you to get the divine assistance and is the best way to form a partnership with the divine that is effective and will get results. Because the Lightworker Healing Protocol explains the many kinds of dynamics that can be in play and prescribes the precise way in which the divine realm can deal with such things and the very tools it might use. When these are requested to be brought to bear for people in need, this gives an exact description for the divine realm in what is needed, leaving nothing to chance, and putting power of human intention behind the requests. This gives us the fuel to use so we will have everything needed to understand what you want to happen, what needs to be brought to bear, and to what extent among the tools used by the divine realm for assisting humanity, as well as what is needed to heal the interlopers so these bullies will withdraw and let you live in peace at long last. No complete resolution of the human dilemma can happen if they are still around in your world. The planned human ascension will simply not take place until they are healed and leave you alone to complete your own healing. This is the goal through combined use of empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol to bring about enough healing to clear the decks, finally, of the ravages of time, with so much corruption and negativity unopposed through ignorance and a lack of wherewithal as a consequence. That is changing now with the tools in hand that can truly do the job. You need to get going and get your compatriots to go with you. The more the better, because time is growing short to turn this around. There is much catching up you must do. But if you start now in earnest, you can win. The key is to begin and keep at it.
And you can begin by downloading our empowered prayer book at getwisdom.com/prayer, as well as learn all you can about the Lightworker Healing Protocol. Download our ebook describing it at getwisdom.com/LHP. That's getwisdom.com/LHP. That's all we have for this week's Get Wisdom Live. Thanks, everybody.
Take care and be well.